I'll never forget the dry smack of that slap. The instant my daughter-in-law's hand met my face, the whole ballroom seemed to fall silent, as if even the orchestra had choked on a suspended note. The crack echoed like a gunshot, like a verdict. Standing there before more than 100 guests, I felt my body burn, not only from the physical pain, but from the brutal humiliation that cut through me like a blade. The world spun around me. I could see shocked faces, parted mouths, indignant gasps, and, beneath it all, the shadow of a cruel smile on her lips. The woman I was supposed to call my daughter that very day. Want to know how this tale of humiliation, secrets, and silent revenge ends? Then watch until the very end and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the next stories as intense as this one. My mind scrambled for understanding. I had done nothing but protect what was mine, the keys to my apartment, my home, my refuge, the place I built with tears and sweat, brick by brick. After my husband's death forced me to rebuild my life from almost nothing. You're selfish. You ruined my wedding, she screamed, her high voice ringing off walls hung with white flowers and twinkling lights. Righteous indignation flared inside me, but my legs stayed steady and my hands stayed still. I would not be reduced to the caricature of a fragile old woman, not that day, not in front of so many. I took a deep breath and let the strength I had always carried in my chest hold me upright. I looked at my son, my only son, the man I raised, who I'd carried in my arms and guided along so many paths. In that moment his eyes weren't on me, they were fixed on her. And in the complicit silence of that look I felt a second slap, invisible but far more painful than the first. Voices rose, some whispered, others tried to hide their astonishment. I heard words like shame, scandal, broken family. The ceremony that was supposed to be my son's happiest day had become a stage for my public humiliation. I closed my eyes for a second. In that inner silence I heard my husband's voice like a distant echo from the past. Never give away what's yours, no matter who asks. Dignity has no price. When I opened my eyes, I saw before me not merely an enraged bride, but a woman revealing her true face, greedy, arrogant, hungry for control. And I realized, with painful clarity, that slap wasn't just an impulsive act, it was a declaration of war. I did not answer, not then. My silence was my first weapon. In that instant I vowed to myself, this story will not end with my defeat. The wedding went on, but nothing would be the same. Something had been broken there, in front of everyone. And though many believed I would leave destroyed, inside me a force began to grow that no one expected. I knew I would endure more humiliation. I knew insults would come, isolation, perhaps even my own son's scorn. But I also knew, as certainly as I feel blood pulsing in my veins, that in the end I would be the one to lift my head. And when I did, it would be to watch her fall. After the slap, silence took shape. It wasn't merely the absence of sound. It was a weight, dense and suffocating, that seemed to settle over us all. I could hear a glass clink as it slipped from someone's hand, the slow scrape of a chair in the corner, even the quickened breaths of those witnessing it. Above all, I felt the stares, hundreds of them, some indignant, others complicit, many curious, all fixed on me like sharp needles. The bride, my daughter-in-law, kept her hand raised, as if she wanted to freeze the gesture in time. The flush on her face wasn't shame, it was triumph. It was as though she were saying to everyone, "See, I have the power." My face burned, but I did not bow my head. I made a point of holding my posture, keeping my chin up. If I bent, if I showed weakness, then she would have won. My God, what a scandal. I heard one bridesmaid whisper, "Did she deserve it?" Another replied, with a malicious look. The sharp tongues were already at work, honing the blade of slander that would follow me for a long time. I searched for my son's eyes again. He stood motionless, like someone turned to stone between two forces. His gaze swung from me to his wife, hesitant, and in the depths of it I saw the conflict, the woman he'd chosen to share his life with, versus the mother who had given him life. I waited for him to say something, to defend me, to at least offer a gesture of support. Nothing came. His silence was the cruelest sentence. A wave of indignation rose in my chest. How could he remain silent in the face of such injustice? I knew many of the guests watched for my reaction. They wanted to see if I would lose control, if I would strike back, if I would turn the wedding into an even greater spectacle. But no, that was not my role. I looked at my daughter-in-law. Rather than answer with words or gestures, I returned a dignified silence, a silence that said, "You may have hurt me, but you have not destroyed me." The band, hesitant, returned to a few notes, trying to restore normalcy to what was already irretrievably lost. Guests began to move again, but the atmosphere had changed. The wedding that should have been a celebration of love was now a battlefield, and I had become the central target. A tear threatened to fall, but I swallowed it. I would not give her the pleasure of seeing my pain run down my face. At the back of the hall, I saw my friend shaking her head in disapproval. Some longtime friends averted their eyes, unable to face me. It was as if everyone judged me for defending what was mine. As if, suddenly, the victim had become the villain of the story. And in that moment I understood. I was alone. But inside that solitude something began to stir. A spark of revolt, of strength, of fire. Not today, not tomorrow, but there would come a day when all eyes would turn to me again, not to see me fall, but to witness my victory. The music continued. Forced laughs tried to fill the air. The scandal was done, and inside me pulsed a certainty. This marriage did not seal just a union. It sealed the beginning of a war. That night, lying my head on the pillow with my cheeks still stinging from the slap, the scene replayed over and over in my mind like a never-ending film. But along with it came another recollection, the first time I met that woman, long before she became my daughter-in-law. She was young, pretty, with a smile so open it lit up the room. My son brought her to dinner at our home, and I received her with the open heart I always offered his friends. I brought wine, prepared my favorite dish, wanting to impress. After all, I thought she might be his future companion. "Mrs. Helena, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," she said, with a firm handshake, bright eyes, and a respectful tone that charmed me immediately. In that instant I felt a sweet relief. After so many years raising my son alone, I wanted him to be happy. I confess, I imagined she could be like a daughter I never had. At first, her sweetness was undeniable. She helped set the table, praised my recipes, said she envied the warm relationship I had with my son. I remember one evening she sighed while looking at me. "I hope one day I have with you the same closeness I have with my mother." My heart warmed. I wanted to believe. I needed to believe. But like any good soap opera, the signs were there, disguised beneath the makeup of congeniality. Small gestures, nearly imperceptible. An impatient look when I told an old story. A muffled sigh when my son praised my cooking more than hers. A sudden rush to end visits when we began to talk about family memories. Fool that I was, I ignored them. I clung to the practiced smile and polite words. Life had already taught me that loneliness is cruel, and I feared that my suspicion would ruin my son's chance at happiness. So, little by little, I opened the doors of my heart to her. I remember a Christmas, not long after they began dating. She arrived with presents wrapped in expensive paper and shiny ribbons. For me, she brought a red silk scarf. I remember stroking the fabric with emotion and saying, "How thoughtful. You didn't have to." She smiled and replied, "Oh, Mrs. Helena, you'll be my second mother. I need to win your heart." How could I resist words like that? I surrendered. In that moment there was no room for doubts. If someone had told me that night of presents that some years later she would raise her hand against me on the day of her own wedding, I would have called that person crazy. But life has a cruel way of stripping masks and showing the naked truth. And though I only realized it much later, that expensive gift was not a symbol of affection but of calculation, not love, strategy. What I know now is that, from the beginning, there was a hunger behind that sweet smile. A hunger that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with power. The months after that first meeting were a quiet dance of impressions and disguises. She knew exactly how to behave in public, attentive, polite, always with a sweet word ready. But when the attention was elsewhere, the first glimpses of who she really was would appear. I remember a Sunday night when I invited them both for dinner. I made a stew my son had loved since he was a boy. The table was set with care. Linen napkins I'd embroidered myself, the porcelain I saved for special occasions. When he tasted the food and said, "Mom, your stew is unbeatable. Nobody makes it like you do," I saw, from the corner of my eye, her lips pressed together as if the compliment were an offense. She covered it quickly. Of course, she smiled and added, "Mom's cooking is always the best, right?" But her eyes, oh her eyes said something else. Another episode is etched in my memory. We were all in the living room looking through an old photo album. I showed pictures of my son, as a child, in his school uniform, smiling with two front teeth missing. I spoke proudly of how studious he'd always been, how he'd struggled to get into university. She sighed loudly and murmured, "Ah, those old stories. Sometimes I think we should just live in the present." The sentence seemed innocent, but it carried poison. It was as if she were saying, "What you did for him no longer matters. Now he's mine." And again, I kept quiet. My heart insisted it was only jealousy, only silly possessiveness. After all, who was I to compete? I had my time, as the center of my son's life. Now it was her turn. But what hurt wasn't losing space. It was feeling that, instead of sharing love, she wanted to tear me away from him, as if my place by his side were a throne to be seized. Over time, the small gestures of disdain multiplied. She rolled her eyes when I suggested something. She forgot to tell me about family commitments. She hinted that I was old-fashioned, that I needed to modernize my way of living. One day, during a trivial conversation, she let slip, "Mrs. Helena, maybe you should think about resting more. You know, a woman your age doesn't need to worry so much about keeping a house. You could sell the apartment and buy something smaller. Or just let us take care of things." The sentence stabbed me like a dagger. My apartment, my refuge, the only concrete legacy left from my life with my husband. She spoke sweetly, but the intent was clear. Plant the idea that my independence was a burden, and that I should hand it over on a platter. My heart trembled, but I kept a calm expression. I smiled as if I hadn't grasped the depth of what had been said, and replied, "I still feel strong enough to take care of myself." She laughed, feigning lightness. Of course, just a suggestion." But inside me something had already been lit. It was the first sign that the battle would not be easy. She didn't want only my son. She wanted what I'd built with my own hands. And the first, naively, still believed I could keep the peace. The apartment, too many, it was just concrete walls. To me it was so much more. It was my temple, my safe harbor, the living proof that I survived when everyone thought I wouldn't. When my husband died years ago, the world collapsed. We had almost nothing left. Debts, overdue bills, a grief so deep it felt like it consumed me. I remember sleepless nights and the anguish of wondering how I would raise my son alone. It was in that chaos that I decided I would not be defeated. I worked as a seamstress by day, cleaned houses at night, and on weekends took any odd job I could. My life became a constant struggle, but every penny I saved had a destination, the dream of a home of our own. Years of sacrifice, years of renunciation, until finally, I signed the deed. I will never forget the day I opened the door for the first time. My son, still a teenager, ran through the rooms shouting, "Mom, this house is ours. It's real." At that moment I knew all the effort had been worth it. That apartment wasn't about luxury or vanity. It was victory. It was dignity. It was the guarantee that, no matter what, I would always have a roof to call my own. So when I heard those apparently innocent words from my daughter-in-law, "You should sell it, or let us take care of it," a chill ran down my spine. She wasn't talking about just any house. She was talking about my blood, my sweat, my story. My apartment was more than walls and furniture. It symbolized my freedom. I knew that as long as those keys were in my hand, I would never be anyone's prisoner. That night I held the keys in bed and ran my fingers over the cold metal. I remembered every time I'd thought of giving up, every tear I'd shed, the humiliations I'd endured to get here. I vowed to myself, no one will take this from me. No one. But fate is ironic. What for me was a reminder of struggle and triumph, for her was an obstacle, a challenge, a trophy to be claimed. And so the real, silent war began. She didn't ask for the apartment again then. But in every look, in every disguised comment, in every dismissive gesture, I could feel it. The apartment was her obsession. What I didn't yet know was how far she would go to take it. The first pressures started almost imperceptibly, like someone casting tiny hooks into the water and waiting for the fish to bite without noticing. She never said outright, "I want your apartment." No, her approach was subtler, more poisonous. One Sunday afternoon at family lunch, she said with a sweet smile, "Oh, wouldn't it be nice if we already had a little place ready? That way we could start married life without so much debt. It's impossible to buy anything these days, right?" She said it, looking at me, leaving the sentence in the air as if waiting for me to finish it with an offer. I smiled, cut my meat slowly, and replied only, "It's true. Times are tough." I saw irritation flash across her eyes for a second, then she masked it. A few weeks later, at another dinner, she dropped another gem. "Mrs. Helena, your apartment is so cozy. Have you thought how wonderful it would be if it stayed in the family, serving future generations?" Staying in the family, I knew, meant only one thing: her and my son. I took a sip of wine and kept my tone light. "Yes, I've thought about it. But for now, I want to live there until my last day." She laughed, but the laughter didn't reach her eyes. There was one visit when, pretending distraction, she asked, "Oh, where do you keep the spare keys? It's always good to have someone you trust with them, right? Just in case of an emergency." My heart froze. That was no longer an innocent suggestion. It was a direct probe. "Don't worry. I know where I keep them and I manage fine myself. I've never needed anyone for that," I answered firmly. She made a face of fake surprise, as if offended by my distrust. "Oh my, imagine. I only thought I was helping, but I knew, I could see the hunger behind that mask of sweetness. It wasn't help, it was desire." And with each frustrated attempt I realized, her insistence would only grow. The apartment, with the smell of fresh coffee and walls soaked in memories, had become the trophy she coveted most. I still didn't understand how far that ambition could take her. But I felt in my chest a bitter certainty. The worst was still to come. My son has always been my pride. An honest, hard-working man with a sensitive heart. He grew up at my side, witnessing my sacrifices and understanding my struggles. I believed he would never forget that. But love is strange. When it blinds, it can turn even the clearest minds into prisoners. Over the months, I saw him change. Not abruptly, but in small things, details that, added up, screamed at me. Where once he called every day to see how I was, the calls grew rare. Where once we had Sunday lunches together, he suddenly had plans or preferred to stay home with her. Where once he shared his worries and victories with me, now there was silence, a heavy silence filled by her shadow. Once, after another failed attempt by my daughter-in-law to wrest the keys from me, he came to visit alone. We sat in the living room, and I felt his unease. He fiddled with his hands, avoided eye contact. Finally he said, "Mom, we need to talk. Clara feels insecure. She thinks you don't trust her." I breathed deeply. The poison had already seeped in. "It's not about trust, my son. It's about boundaries. The apartment is mine, and only I know how much it cost to get here," I said. He lowered his eyes, but insisted in a nearly pleading voice, "But what if something happens someday? Wouldn't it be easier if she had a copy of the keys?" My heart broke. It wasn't him speaking. It was her words coming out of his mouth. I held his hands and said, looking into his eyes, "My son, I love you. But don't confuse love with blind surrender. I already gave my life for you. What I have today is the fruit of everything I went through. Don't ask me to give that up." He fell silent. I could feel the conflict in his soul. Part of him wanted to hug me, to protect me, but another part, the part she fed every day, pulled him away. In the days that followed, he began to avoid certain subjects. He stopped mentioning the apartment, stopped talking about keys, but the distance grew, silent and cruel. And deep down, I knew it wasn't his choice. It was the web she had woven, thread by thread, until it wrapped around him completely. Still, I did not give in, because I knew that if I handed over a single key, I wouldn't just lose an apartment, I would lose my dignity. The hall still seemed saturated with the echo of that slap. People tried to resume the celebration, but it was useless. The joy that once overflowed had turned into a silence broken only by poisonous whispers. Every table felt like a courtroom, every glance, a judgment. I stood motionless, feeling like a defendant in the public square. My face burned, not just from the sting of the slap, but from the shame of being exposed before so many. This wasn't just any party, it was my son's wedding. And yet, I had become the center of the scandal. In the corner, I saw a distant aunt cover her mouth with her hand, murmuring to her neighbor, "What an outrage," at the wedding itself. "But they say she's difficult, always wanted to control her son." The phrases struck me like arrows. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to say that all this was nothing but grotesque injustice, but I knew it wouldn't help. In that moment, her version prevailed. The wronged bride, the uncompromising Maharana, my son, standing beside me, remained silent. And that silence hurt more than any words. He didn't defend me. He didn't look me in the eye. He just stood there, as if he didn't know which side to choose. The orchestra tried to play again. Waiters resumed passing trays, but the atmosphere was poisoned. Every laugh sounded forced, every toast a desperate attempt to salvage what was already lost. And in the middle of it all, I saw my daughter-in-law. She wasn't crying. She wasn't trembling. On the contrary, she looked lofty, almost victorious, like an actress who had just played the starring scene of a soap opera, and in her eyes was a cruel gleam, the shine of someone convinced she had defeated me. But what she didn't know was that, at that very instant, something was also being born inside me. I would not be remembered merely as the humiliated mother-in-law at the wedding. No. I would be the woman who resisted, who stood tall, who rebuilt her dignity even when everyone doubted her. And I swore silently, while the guests resumed their whispers. One day, in that same society that now judged me, she would be the one exposed, stripped before the truth. The wedding had been ruined, not by my refusal to hand over keys, but by the venom she herself had spread, and sooner or later, everyone would see it. In the days following the wedding, the slap never left my mind, nor anyone else's lips. Wherever I went, I felt the weight of curious stares. At the grocery store, they whispered when I passed. At the bakery, conversations stopped the moment I entered. Even among old neighbors, I noticed shadows of doubt. It was as if the slap had marked not only my face, but also my name. And yet, what hurt most wasn't the sharp tongues in the neighborhood. It was his silence, my son's. The next day I waited for a call, a visit, any gesture of affection. Nothing. 2 days later I thought, maybe he's busy with a makeshift honeymoon, with wedding commitments. A week later, there were no more excuses. I was the one who called. His voice was cold, distant, burdened with a formality I didn't recognize. "Hi, Mom, I'm busy now. We'll talk later." There wasn't even the attempt to soften it, to ask how I was, to see if I had endured the storm of comments that had rained down on me. That later never came. His messages were rare and curt. No more confidences, no more sharing. It was as if an invisible wall had risen between us, and on the other side was her, the woman who now controlled every step, every word, every trace of affection he gave. At night, alone in my apartment, I asked myself when I had lost my son. Was it that first dinner when I didn't notice her mask, or when I accepted her small gestures of contempt in silence, pretending not to see? Or was it the instant she raised her hand and he didn't stop her? Answers never came. Only pain. But with the pain, something else grew. An indignation that burned, a fire that kept me from breaking. I no longer had my husband to support me. My son was slipping away. My neighbors judged me. And still, inside me, the firm voice that had carried me so many times rose again. "Helena, you weren't born to bow. You were born to resist." And so I resisted, with tears in my eyes, but my head held high. I knew the war was only beginning, and if they thought silence would be enough to crush me, they were about to discover the strength of a woman who had already lost everything once, but never surrendered. It didn't take long to realize his family, my in-laws, people I had always respected and welcomed, were beginning to distance themselves from me. At first, it was just small things, a phone call never returned, a lunch invitation that got lost in the rush of daily life, but soon the curtain dropped, and the hostility surfaced. One cousin of his, who had always treated me warmly, crossed paths with me at the market and quickly looked away, pretending not to see me. At Sunday Mass, I heard whispers behind me, words cut short, but enough to understand their meaning. What a disgrace, in front of everyone. Well, she always wanted to control him. I didn't need names. I knew who was feeding those sharp tongues. My daughter-in-law. It was clear. She had turned the wedding scandal into a story in her favor. To others, I was no longer the sacrificing mother who raised a son alone, who earned every brick of her home with sweat. No. I was the possessive mother-in-law, the bitter woman who didn't know when to step aside. On one visit to his family's home, I felt it even stronger. One of the aunts, with airs of superiority, said right in front of me, "I think when we love, we share everything. Those who hold on too tightly end up alone." The poison was obvious, and the glances exchanged across the room confirmed it. They were all on her side. My heart tightened, not because of their opinion, but because I saw the direct effect of this web of intrigue on my son. He was more distant each day, as if he truly believed the stories she spread, as if I really were the villain she painted me to be. That night, Back in my apartment, I cried in silence, not because of gossip, but because of the siege closing in. It was like standing in an arena, alone, against a crowd applauding my execution. And yet, something inside me remained firm. I knew who I was. I knew what I had built. And above all, I knew that every lie is eventually revealed. They could turn their backs on me. They could repeat her words until they believed them, but I would not bow. And when her mask finally fell, because masks always do, all those who judged me now would have to face me again. And then, the shame would not be mine. He showed up without warning. On a rainy afternoon, the sound of water pounding against the windows barely muffled the tightness in my chest when I heard the doorbell. When I opened the door and saw my son, I felt a surge of instinctive joy, as if he had finally come to reach out after so many days of silence. But one look was enough to see something was wrong. His eyes no longer had their warmth. They were cold, carrying a distance that wasn't his. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door slowly. My heart pounded. We sat in the living room, facing each other. He drew a deep breath, like someone rehearsing a speech. "Clara is very hurt. She feels you don't really accept her. And this apartment business, it's creating a wall between us." The words fell on me like stones. I breathed deeply before replying. "It's not about acceptance, my son. It's about what's mine. This apartment is the fruit of years of sacrifice. It's not a whim, it's dignity." He frowned, impatient. "But Mom, why are you so rigid? We're not talking about selling it, only about sharing responsibility. If you gave Clara a copy of the key, she'd feel included, like part of the family." My stomach turned. The manipulation was clear. It wasn't him speaking. It was her voice echoing through him. I leaned closer, touched his hand. "My son, you know how hard I fought for every inch of this home. I will not give up my keys. This isn't about mistrust, it's about respect for my own story. If she doesn't understand that, then perhaps she needs to learn the difference between love and possession." He pulled his hand away, irritated. "Mom, don't you see? You're putting walls between me and her. A marriage can't survive without trust. If you don't give in, you'll force me to choose." The phrase pierced me like a spear. Force him to choose. My own son, who had always said I was his safe harbor, now threatened me with this cruel choice. I felt tears burn, but I didn't let them fall. I kept my voice firm. "If that day comes, I won't be the one responsible, because I've asked for nothing but respect. The choice, my son, will be yours." He stood, agitated, and left without looking back. The slam of the door echoed through the empty apartment, leaving behind a painful silence. And I knew, with a broken heart, the battle was no longer silent, it was now declared. After the door slammed and my son left, I stood still in the living room. The echo of those words, "You'll force me to choose," hammered in my head like a cruel sentence. My legs trembled, and for a moment I thought I might collapse. Instead, I walked to the shelf where his photograph still rested. My husband, my companion. The man life had taken too soon, leaving me alone to raise a child and face the world. I held the picture frame in both hands. The frame was worn with time, but his smile remained steady, just as he had looked at me the day we promised to face life together. I sat in the armchair and finally let the tears fall. "Oh, my love, if you were here, you'd know what to say," I murmured through sobs. "Our boy is being pulled away by her. I feel him slipping further every day. And now he threatens me with a choice that should never exist." I closed my eyes and, for an instant, swore I heard his voice. "Helena, don't give up what we built. This home is our blood, our sweat. He needs to know dignity isn't to be toyed with." Memories came like waves. I saw us, years ago, young and still full of simple dreams. I remembered the weariness in his eyes when he worked double shifts to secure our son's future. And the night, just before he left this world, when he held my hand and said, "Promise me that no matter what happens, you'll never depend on anyone. Promise me you'll keep your strength, even when the world tries to strip it from you." In that moment, the promise burned in my chest like hot iron. No, I would not give up what was ours. No, I would not let his memory be stained by a stranger's ambition. And no, I would not bend, not to my son's silence, not to relatives' whispers, not to the public slap already becoming neighborhood legend. I wiped my tears, stood, and looked again at the photograph. I promised, my love, and I will keep that promise. They will underestimate me. They will paint me as a villain. But in the end, truth always wins, always, and with that renewed vow, I fell asleep that night, wounded, yes, but never defeated. The distance wasn't just from my son's silence. It was calculated, stitched together, thread by my daughter-in-law's skillful hand. At first, the excuses sounded innocent. Oh, mother-in-law, he couldn't call, he was exhausted from work. He wanted to visit, but we had a last-minute commitment, always with that gentle voice, always with a fake smile, as if she only wanted to take care of him. But soon the excuses became walls. One Sunday, I made our usual lunch, as I had since my son was a boy. I called in the morning to confirm they'd come. She answered, "Oh, Mrs. Helena, what a shame, but we won't be able to We decided to rest, just the two of us. He's very tired." The call ended before I could even hear his voice. The next week I tried again. "Oh, mother-in-law, we're organizing the new house. We can't make it." And so, little by little, the empty Sundays piled up. His chair at my table became a painful silence, harder and harder to bear. Even the phone calls grew rare. When I did manage to talk to him, I could hear her voice in the background calling, hurrying, interrupting, as if every minute he gave me was theft of time, she claimed for herself. One time I insisted he come visit. I spent hours preparing his favorite dishes. The smell of beans cooking and cake baking filled me with almost childlike joy. But when the doorbell rang, it wasn't just him. She was there too, and during the entire visit, she never left his side. Every time I tried to talk alone with him, she cut in. Every time I raised a personal subject, she diverted his attention. It was as if she had come not to visit, but to guard. That day, after they left, I closed the door and collapsed in the armchair. It was no longer imagination, no longer minor suspicions. She was, in fact, trying to rip my son away from me. And the worst part was seeing how he, blind with love, didn't notice. I could have yielded, could have kept quiet, to preserve peace. But inside me indignation only grew, because it wasn't just about the keys. It wasn't just about an apartment. It was about tearing away what I held most precious, my bond with my own son. And it was that day I realized the war that once seemed silent had become open, fierce, without disguises. The first public humiliation came calculated, wrapped in delicacy. It was his aunt's birthday, and despite my hesitation, I decided to go. After all, they were still my family, and I refused to give my daughter-in-law the satisfaction of saying I had withdrawn. I arrived with a homemade cake, as I always did, the sweet scent of orange cake still warm in my hands as I entered the decorated hall. Eyes swept over me from head to toe, some forced smiles, others nothing but coldness, but the worst was yet to come. My daughter-in-law approached, elegant, wrapped in an expensive dress that contrasted with my simplicity. She opened her arms, as if to welcome me with affection. But what came from her mouth was pure venom. "Mrs. Helena, what a surprise to see you here. I was just telling everyone that after the incident at the wedding, you might prefer to stay away." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what incident meant, the slap. And now, in a loud voice, she dragged it back up, as if it were a shared joke. I felt my face burn. Still, I forced a smile and handed her the cake. I thought a little sweetness would do us all good. She took the cake, examining it as if it were something minor, nearly irrelevant. How kind, though I don't know if anyone will prefer homemade cake when we have so many fancy desserts ordered. Contained laughs rippled. It wasn't just the words, but the way she said them, like she was putting the spotlight on our differences. Her, the modern, glamorous wife, me, the outdated mother-in-law, clinging to simple gestures. I spent the rest of the party sitting down, feeling the weight of every glance. Conversations seemed to stop when I approached. Every laugh sounded like mockery, until, at one point, I clearly heard two voices behind me. "Poor thing, doesn't she realize she doesn't belong anymore? Yeah, must be hard for her son, dealing with a mother like that." I swallowed hard. I wanted to stand and shout, to expose the manipulations, the lies, the theater she staged for everyone. But I restrained myself, because I realized something. The more I lashed out, the more I would give her the role of victim. So I did the opposite. I stayed calm. I smiled, even with my throat tight. And when I left, I made sure to say goodbye to everyone with dignity. But inside, I was burning. It was the first battle lost, not by my weakness, but by the power of the mask she wore before society. Even so, I knew the war wouldn't end there, and those who laugh last, laugh loudest. That week, after the birthday humiliation, I needed to breathe. The weight of the words, the whispers, the feeling of being an intruder in my own family circle, it ate at me. So, I accepted the invitation from my longtime friends for coffee at the neighborhood club. We sat at our usual table, floral tablecloth and cups worn thin by time. Around us, other women chatted about trivialities, but we, as always, went deeper. Lucia, the most pragmatic of the group, spoke first. Helena, you're wrong to pick this fight. Your son is young, just starting out. If Clara wants a key, give her the key. It's just a key. Better that than losing the boy for good. I swallowed hard. To her, it was that simple. Yield to preserve. But inside me I knew it wasn't just a piece of metal. It was my whole life. Then Regina, the hot-headed one. No way. Don't give her anything. That woman is an opportunist. Today it's the key. Tomorrow it's the whole apartment. If you give in, you'll regret it for the rest of your days. Her eyes flashed with indignation, as if the battle were hers too. Marta, ever the peacemaker, tried to mediate. I see both sides, but Helena, think, maybe you're letting pride speak louder. Isn't a mother's love bigger than a key? I felt all three looking at me, waiting for my answer. I sighed. You talk about a key as if it were just an object, but it isn't. That key opens my independence, my history, my dignity. I can't hand it over just to please someone. I've given too much in life already. This is the one thing I won't surrender. Silence settled over the table. They knew me. They knew my strength wasn't empty stubbornness, but born of a lifetime of struggle. Then Regina smacked her palm on the table and declared, "Then resist, Helena. Resist to the very end. Because if you fall, she won't stop. And one day your son will see who she really is." Her words echoed inside me like a prophecy. I clung to that hope, that truth, sooner or later, always finds a way to surface. I left that cafe still torn between the fear of losing my son and the conviction not to give in. But one thing was clear, I wasn't completely alone. And sometimes, that's enough to keep fighting. The days that followed were filled with silence and caution. I no longer expected calls from my son or invitations to lunch. The apartment, once lively on Sundays, now felt larger and emptier than ever. Still, I kept to my routine. I brewed my morning coffee, watered my plants, did embroidery whenever the sadness threatened to overflow. But one ordinary afternoon, almost banal, something caught my attention. I went to the bank to sort out a simple payment. While I waited in line, two voices behind me whispered excitedly. I paid them no mind, until a name chilled my blood. Clara. You know, that pretty girl who got married last month. I heard she left a trail of debt before the wedding. My heart raced. I pretended not to listen, but my ears burned. Yeah, my brother-in-law works at a finance company. She almost ended up with her credit wrecked, but she fixed it right before the party. Oh, she's fine now. Married the right guy. Good family. Solid future. I swallowed hard. Debts, a trail of debts. I left the bank with my head pounding, walking the streets as if in a trance. Suddenly, everything made sense. The obsession with my apartment, the haste to get the keys, the venom in her words. It wasn't just a whim, not just a turf war. It was need, desperation, greed disguised as love. That night, I tried to push the thought away, but it kept returning. I remembered her suggesting I sell, or let them take care of things. I remembered the controlled visits, the rehearsed excuses. I remembered the slap at the wedding, before everyone. And for the first time, a flame of clarity flared within me. She wasn't just trying to pull me away from my son. She was after something much bigger, the security I had earned with sweat and tears. I sat on the bed with the cold keys in my hands. I looked at them like a shield and swore, silently, if that's what she wants, that is precisely what she won't get. But deep down, I knew. The rumor about her debts was only the tip of the iceberg. Something much darker was still hidden. And sooner or later, it would come to light. After hearing those whispers at the bank, I could no longer live in peace. Clara's face, my daughter-in-law, appeared in my mind like a smiling mask, but behind it I saw cracks, fissures where the real face was starting to show. That night I sat at the kitchen table, the apartment keys on the tablecloth, and thought, if she has secrets, I'll find them. And not through gossip with my own eyes. I've never been one to meddle in rumors. Life taught me to look forward and handle my own problems, but in that moment, I understood that silence would be my downfall. I had to act. I started simple. At the market, I chatted with a neighbor who knew Clara's family by sight. She's always been pretty, since she was young. Turned heads, she said, picking tomatoes. But there were odd things, friendships no one understood, that set me on alert. Odd things? I asked, trying to sound casual. She only shrugged. Maybe youthful stuff. I don't really know. I just know her mother was always putting out fires. I went home with a full bag and a heavier mind. The next day, I stopped by a shop owned by an acquaintance who worked for a finance company. We had coffee, small talk, until I let slip, as if by accident. Do you remember Clara, who just married my son? My friend raised her brows. Oh, I remember. That case nearly turned bad, didn't it? My heart jumped. What case? She bit her lip, hesitant. Better not say. Client matters. But I can tell you it wasn't easy for her to clear the debts she needed. Help from outside. Help from outside. The words boomed in my head. Who helped her? And at what price? I went home and spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying every gesture and every word from Clara since the start. The pieces began to fit. The insistence on the keys, the contempt for my stories, the slap at the wedding, the engineered isolation between me and my son. She didn't just want me out of the way. She wanted what I had. And if she needed to hide debts, it was because there was far more behind that perfect facade of the exemplary wife. I decided I wouldn't wait for truth to fall in my lap. I would go after it myself, even if I had to dig through her past piece by piece. My investigation began timidly. A question here, an observation there. I felt like I was walking a minefield. Any misstep could expose me and hand my daughter-in-law ammunition. But with every detail that surfaced, I knew I was on the right path. During an unexpected visit to an old friend's house, the pieces started to come together. We were drinking tea, and between sips, she mentioned casually, "Helena, did you know Clara almost lost her car for non-payment?" My heart leaped. "No, I didn't," I said, trying to hide my reaction. "Yep. My nephew works at a dealership and remembers the bank had already approved repossession. In the end, she managed to fix it at the last minute. But really, starting married life, buried in debt." I swallowed hard. A car about to be seized, debts with the finance company, and now married to my son, eyes fixed on my apartment. The pieces formed a grim picture. On the way home, a film played in my mind. Every time she hinted I should hand over the keys, the fake smile when she said she wanted to take care of me, and above all, the slap at the wedding, not just fury, but desperation. She didn't simply want space, she needed guarantees, and my apartment was the best guarantee anyone could have. That night I sat alone in the kitchen, silence heavy around me. I opened the drawer with my documents and pulled out the deed. I ran my fingers over the yellowed paper, remembering every drop of sweat I shed to earn it. And a truth burned inside me. If I gave up a single key, it would be like handing my entire life into her hands. But something else tormented me. If she had so many debts, who else knew? My son. Or was he kept in the dark too, blinded by the illusion she fed him every day? I had to find out. Because if he knew, and still took her side, the wound would be deeper. And if he didn't, then the truth might be my only chance to save him. Either way, the course was set. I would dig until I found everything. And when the time came, her mask wouldn't withstand it. It didn't take long to realize my daughter-in-law had changed tactics. If before she tried to bend me with sweet words and hints, now she used my son as a weapon. He showed up one evening, looking tired, his voice heavy. We sat at the kitchen table, and before he even spoke I knew. The words weren't his. "Mom, Clara's been really sad. She feels like you don't like her, that you'll never truly accept her." I sighed. "My son, liking her or not, has nothing to do with handing over the keys to my home. Those are different things." He looked away, nervous. "But you don't understand. She cries at night, Mom. Says she can't feel like part of the family, that you see her as an enemy." My heart clenched, not because I believed the performance, but because I could see my son being used like a puppet. "And what did you tell her?" I asked. He was silent for a few seconds before murmuring. I said, "Maybe you're scared, but deep down you just need to trust more. That when you gave her a key, she'd finally feel welcomed." I fixed my eyes on him. "My son, a key doesn't define love. And if she can only feel like family when she controls what's mine, then maybe the problem isn't me." He ran his hands through his hair, distraught. "Mom, don't say that. You don't know her pain. You don't know what she's been through. That set off an alarm. And you do? I asked. Firm. He froze, not expecting that. I know some things, but it doesn't matter. What matters is she needs to feel she can trust you. In that moment I saw her game clearly. She wielded fake tears and calculated confessions to paint herself as a victim, and my generous son fell for the act without seeing it. I held his hands, squeezing. My son, I love you more than anything in this world. But learn this: those who demand love through blackmail don't truly love. They love only the power the other can give. He pulled away, irritated. You talk as if you know my wife better than I do. I stood, keeping my posture. It's not knowing her better, it's seeing what you still can't. He left, the door slamming, a painful silence trailing behind him. And I stayed there, heart torn, but more certain than ever. Clara would use any weapon, even my son himself, to get what she wanted. And if she could cry at night, I would learn to bear my own tears in silence, because in the end, today's tears would water tomorrow's revenge. That night, after my son left, I sat alone in the kitchen. The house was steeped in silence, but inside me a storm raged. I closed my eyes and was pulled into the past 2 days when life tested me with ferocity and I had only 2 options: give up or fight. I remembered the first winter after my husband died. Money barely covered the gas bill, and I warmed my son's room with threadbare blankets, pretending I didn't feel the cold cutting through my bones. I remembered the day I sold my wedding ring to pay for his school. How I came home crying, and yet, seeing him happy with new notebooks, found the strength to go on. I recalled endless hours at the sewing machine, fingers calloused, eyes burning with strain. While other women slept, I stayed up past midnight feeding fabric through the needle, thinking only of one thing: my son will have a future. There were moments of humiliation too. Employers who treated me like I was invisible. People who looked down on me, as if my struggle meant nothing. But with every swallowed tear, I repeated to myself, one day I'll have a home of my own, and no one will take it from me. When I finally bought the apartment, it wasn't just a material victory. It was triumph over everyone who doubted me. A shout of freedom. The legacy I decided to leave my son. Not easy money, but proof that dignity is won through struggle. And now, that woman wanted to pluck it from me like ripe fruit off a tree, as if it were her right, as if my past, my sweat, were just disposable pieces in her game of ambition. I ran my hand over the keys on the table. Cold metal, more precious to me than gold. They weren't iron keys, they were keys forged of sacrifice, tears, sleepless nights. Clenching my fists, I looked at my husband's portrait on the wall and murmured, if they think I'll hand this over, they don't know me. I've faced hunger, loneliness, humiliation. Facing one woman's greed will be just one more battle. And deep down I felt that those memories, painful as they were also my armor, because a woman who has survived everything fears nothing. The threat came on a night meant for celebration. It was a cousin's birthday, and despite the heavy mood of recent months, I decided to go. After all, I was family, or so I still believed. I arrived with a box of handmade chocolates, a simple gift, chosen with care. I greeted a few relatives, received cold smiles, and half hugs. I was used to sideways looks by then, but nothing prepared me for what was about to happen. My daughter-in-law was stunning in a red dress, the center of attention. She was the star of the show, and everyone, hypnotized, gladly played supporting roles. When I approached, she smiled. The smile I already knew was just a facade. What a surprise to see you here, Mrs. Helena, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I thought you might avoid these gatherings after everything. That everything landed like a silent accusation. Some laughed nervously, others looked away. I kept my composure and answered evenly, I'm part of the family, dear. I see no reason to stay away. She leaned toward me as if offering a discreet comment, but spoke loud enough for those nearby to catch every word. But don't you think your presence makes things awkward? After what happened at the wedding, some people would rather not get involved. My stomach churned. Are you saying I'm not welcome? I asked, steady. She smiled, icy, her eyes gleaming with cruelty. I'm just saying it might be better to avoid unpleasant situations. I don't want anyone feeling uncomfortable because of you. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt dozens of eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. If I raised my voice, I'd be the villain. If I stayed quiet, I'd be seen as defeated. I swallowed my indignation, took a breath, and answered with dignity. Anyone who's uncomfortable with my presence should reconsider their own idea of family. I turned and walked away, leaving a trail of whispers behind me. My heart burned, my hands trembled, but my head was high. She wanted to push me out, erase me from social life, from the family, from their daily orbit, but I knew those who rush to isolate others are afraid of being unmasked, and I was getting closer and closer to ripping off her mask in front of everyone. After that night, something finally broke between me and my son. It wasn't a declared split, no shouting or accusations. It was worse, a silent drift, like sand slipping through fingers. Visits, which were already rare, all but disappeared. When I called, he answered in a hurried voice, almost always with the same excuse. Can't now. Mom, I'll call you later. That later never came. Sundays, once sacred in our lives, turned into empty days. I would sit at the set table, staring at the empty chair that had once been his, and the silence devoured me. The clock ticked the hours, but time itself seemed to stall. One afternoon, overcome by longing, I decided to go to their house. I brought a warm cornmeal cake, like in the old days. When he opened the door, I saw it immediately. His smile was no longer for me. It was practiced, distant. Mom, you should have called. Clara doesn't like surprise visits. Those words pierced me like a dagger. Surprise visits. Since when does a mother need an appointment to see her own son? Still, I went in, trying to ignore the thinly veiled hostility. But with every minute it became clear. I was invading a territory that was no longer mine. Clara treated me with frosty politeness, every gesture heavy with falseness. Would you like some coffee, Mrs. Helena? She asked, but without standing, as if hoping I'd refuse. And my son? My son remained silent, unable to confront her, unable to defend his own mother. When I left, I handed him the cake. He thanked me quickly, glancing toward his wife like a child asking permission. In that instant I realized he no longer owned his own voice. I returned home with a torn heart. It wasn't only a physical distance, it was a distance of the soul. The boy who once told me I was his fortress was now trapped in a foreign stronghold, built by greedy, manipulative hands. That night I lay down without tears. There was no room left for crying. What filled me was revolt. Revolt at the silent betrayal. Revolt at my son's cowardice in not seeing. Above all, revolt at the certainty that she was winning the war, little by little, dragging him further from me. But I also knew no lie lasts forever. And when the truth came out, because truth always comes out, I would be there, standing, steady, ready to strip her mask before everyone. Sometimes fate hands you answers when you least expect them. That day I had gone downtown to run errands, pay bills, buy fabric for my embroidery. I was walking along when I heard a voice. Helena, is that you? I turned and saw a woman I didn't recognize at first. Gray hair, tired eyes, but something about her face was familiar. I am Marcia, remember? I worked with your husband at the warehouse years ago. Memory clicked. Yes, I knew her by sight. We greeted each other, and conversation flowed. Then she mentioned casually, I'm an old neighbor of Clara's mother. Your family now, aren't you? My heart quickened. Yes, my daughter-in-law. Marcia sighed and shook her head. Helena, I don't mean to meddle, but be careful. Clara has always been mixed up in trouble. Before the wedding, she dated a dangerous man. He was deep in gambling debt. She nearly lost everything with him. I heard she's still not completely free of it. The ground seemed to fall away beneath me. A hidden past, a dangerous man, gambling debts. Suddenly, Clara's perfect smiles began to crumble in my memory. And worse, Marcia continued. They say she took out a loan in her mother's name to save that man. A large sum. Her mother is still paying for it. My stomach turned. So that was it. The debts weren't just hers, there was a history. A stain she tried to hide beneath expensive dresses and calculated gestures. I thanked her, legs trembling, and walked home in a daze. I sat in the living room staring at my husband's portrait and whispered, now I understand. She doesn't want what's mine out of whim. She needs it. She's drowning in a dirty past that still haunts her. Worse yet, my son had no idea. I was almost certain he did not know, because if he did, he would never have agreed to marry her. Or would he? That doubt gnawed at me for hours. If he knew and stayed silent, then he was more entangled than I imagined. But if he didn't know, the truth in my hands might be the only weapon to open his eyes. In that moment I realized the war was about to change course. I finally had something stronger than keys and silences. I had the truth. Marcia's words didn't leave my head. I could try to ignore them, but the truth fit too neatly to be mere gossip. The debts, the fake tears, the rush to access my apartment, everything fell into place like pieces of a grim puzzle. But I needed more. I needed proof. Without proof, it was just rumor, and if I confronted my son with words alone, he would believe her. So I decided to go back to the neighborhood where Clara's family lived. It was a simple place with narrow streets and humble houses. I walked slowly, watching. There it was, Clara's mother's house, rusty gate, heavy curtains hiding the living room. I took a deep breath and knocked. Clara's mother opened the door, surprised. "Oh, Mrs. Helena, I didn't expect you." We talked for a few minutes about trivial things, and then I steered the conversation toward the subject. I heard Clara went through hard times. Tears filled the woman's eyes. "Oh, my daughter, you don't imagine. That story nearly ruined me. She got involved with a troubled man, full of debts. To help him, she convinced me to take a loan in my name. I still pay the installments today." My heart tightened. There was confirmation. It wasn't gossip, it was real. "And Clara?" I asked cautiously. The woman led me to a cabinet and, in an outpouring, showed me a worn folder. Papers, contracts, receipts, proof. My eyes skimmed the tiny print, the absurd amounts, the signatures. It was all real. Clara had dragged her own mother into the abyss of her choices. I left with a heavy heart but also a burning flame inside. I now held not only suspicions but weapons. Weapons that could, at any moment, turn the tide. Walking home, I clutched that folder to my chest, because I knew from then on nothing would be the same. The time of silent humiliations was ending. The day of revelation was approaching. I spent the night wide awake. The folder with documents lay on the kitchen table like a bomb about to go off. Each paper, each signature, each absurd amount reminded me that my daughter-in-law was not the woman she pretended to be. But I knew, truth mishandled can turn on you. If I threw those proofs on the table now, without preparation or strategy, she would find a way to reverse it. She would paint herself as the victim, accuse me of invasion, manipulate my son further against me. No, I had to be patient. I had to be cold. I breathed deeply, and for the first time in a long while, felt the pain turning into something else. Determination. I had cried enough. I had been humiliated, judged, excluded. Now it was my turn to use silence as a weapon. I hid the folder in the wardrobe beneath my winter clothes. No one would ever find it there. And I decided that until the right moment, I would keep it secret. In the days that followed, I watched more than I spoke. When I met my son, I smiled serenely, even when he treated me coldly. When I saw Clara, I returned a glaring arrogance with a calm look, as if nothing could shake me. And it bothered her. I could tell. She expected me to react, to lose control, to hand her ammunition. But my silence was a wall she couldn't get through. Meanwhile, I reinforced my independence. I changed the apartment locks, hired a handyman for small repairs, renovated the kitchen, and repainted the walls. Each hammer blow, each brushstroke was a silent declaration. This place is mine, untouchable, indestructible. As fresh paint covered the walls, I felt a new layer of strength heal my heart. I knew the final confrontation would come, but when it did, I would not be on my knees. I would be standing with proof in hand and dignity in my eyes. The era of submission was over. Now came the time of smart waiting, the time to prepare, in silence, for her downfall. In the days that followed, I turned my attention back to what truly belonged to me, myself and my home. Each hammer stroke in the renovation felt like a strike, mending the parts in my chest, broken by humiliation. I called a workman to replace the worn kitchen tiles. I bought new paint and, with my own hands, painted the living room a light color that reflected more light. I changed the old curtains and planted fresh flowers on the balcony. With every change, the apartment seemed to breathe again. And so did I. It wasn't just a renovated space. It was a symbol, a silent shout that I was still alive and would not be erased by my son's disdain or my daughter-in-law's poison. I even began to see myself differently in the mirror. I let my hair down, bought a new dress with the savings I kept for emergencies, and put on red lipstick after many years. When I looked at my reflection in the window glass, I didn't see a defeated woman. I saw a warrior preparing for the next battle. Then the news reached her. It didn't take long for Clara to appear with that pastidon smile. "Oh, my mother-in-law, I heard you're renovating the apartment. What an energy. Huh. Her tone was light, but her eyes burned with curiosity. She wanted to know if I was preparing to give the house away. I stayed serene. Yes, Clara, I decided to care for what's mine. After all, you never know how much time you'll have left to enjoy it, right? She smiled, jaw tight. My simple acts were daggers to her because they meant the opposite of what she wanted. I wasn't weakening. I was growing stronger. After she left, I laughed to myself for the first time in months, because I realized something precious. Silence can wound. And nothing irritated her more than seeing me standing tall, rebuilding my home and myself, when all she wanted was me on my knees. People have keen eyes for noticing misfortune, but they also notice unexpected changes, and that's what began to happen. At the market, where I used to walk with my head down, now I moved with confident steps, new dress and red lipstick. Neighbors who once whispered behind my back now looked at me in surprise. "Helena, you look different, even younger," Mrs. Teresa said as she picked oranges. I just smiled. It wasn't vanity, it was strength. At the neighborhood club my friends noticed too. "Look who decided to bloom again," teased Regina. I laughed with them, genuinely, without the weight of shame. The change didn't stay confined to my small circle. It reached Clara's ears. And then, I noticed with delight, she couldn't stand seeing me upright. One day, at a family lunch, I caught her eyes assessing every detail: my neat hair, my fresh clothes, the serene smile that no longer carried hurt. She tried to land a jab with a sweet tone. "So good to see you, so lively, Matilina. Maybe solitude inspires this rejuvenation, huh?" There were cautious giggles around the table, but this time it didn't hurt. I was ready. I looked her in the eye and answered calmly, "No, dear. It's not solitude, it's freedom." The silence that followed spoke louder than any argument. Some smiled discreetly. Others looked away, uncomfortable. And Clara, for the first time, lost her breath. I walked home with a different feeling in my chest. It wasn't just resistance. It was the start of a turnaround. Little by little, the image she had built of me, the bitter, defeated mother-in-law, began to crumble. And the more I rose in other people's eyes, the smaller she became. It was like watching a charade fall apart. And I knew she felt it. She felt the fear of losing her leading role. I already knew, the higher I rose, the more she fidgeted. And it didn't take long for Clara to show she couldn't stand to lose ground. Her first moves were masked. An innocent invitation for tea at her house, where she left me waiting alone in the living room for half an hour while she whispered with a friend in the bedroom. A veiled joke in front of relatives implying I'd become needy since I was widowed. A defiant look every time someone complimented my appearance or newfound spirit. But soon the attacks became direct. At a family gathering she commented loud enough for everyone to hear, "Mrs. Helena has been investing so much in the apartment. I'm even afraid she's spending what she should be saving for emergencies. At her age you never know when you'll need care." Right. Some laughed. Others exchanged uncomfortable looks. My heart burned, but my voice was calm and steady. "Dear, I learned early to take care of myself. I can assure you, the dignity I earned won't be taken away, not even by time." The sentence hung in the air like a silent blow. In her eyes I saw fury behind that icy smile. It didn't stop there. A few days later I received a call from a friend. "Helena, I heard strange things. They say you're blowing through your savings and might lose the apartment." I smiled bitterly. It was obvious where the rumors came from. Clara, desperate to paint me as unstable, now used slander. For a moment I felt fear, because a lie repeated enough can become truth in others' eyes. But that fear turned into strength. If she needed to invent stories, it meant her castle of illusions was shaken. The more she fought to tear me down, the more obvious it would be she was losing control. That night when I closed my apartment door, I gripped the keys and thought, "Bring the storm on, Clara. I've weathered worse hurricanes." He came to visit one overcast afternoon when the rain threatened, but hadn't yet fallen. At first I thought it might be simple longing, a flicker of the boy who always said I was his fortress. But one look at his eyes told me he carried a silent battle inside. We sat in the living room. I offered him coffee, as I always did, and he accepted in silence. The clinking of cups sounded louder than our words. Then he spoke. "Mom, I can't stand being between you two anymore." My heart tightened. "There shouldn't be a between, my son. I am your mother. She is your wife. There's room for both." He shook his head, nervous. "You don't understand. Clara feels rejected. She tells me she can't build a real family while you won't open the doors of your apartment, while you won't trust her. I swallowed. The same refrain as always, but this time I sensed a deeper weight. He believed it. And you? I asked, voice steady. Do you also think a key is more important than all the love and sacrifice I've given you? He dropped his eyes and fiddled with his coffee. I just want peace, Mom. But when I'm with you, I feel her pain. When I'm with her, I feel yours. It's like I'll never manage to reconcile the two. I reached out and touched his arm. My son, peace doesn't come from giving up who we are. It comes from recognizing the truth. One day you'll see the truth about her. He lifted his eyes, tearful. For a moment I saw the boy who ran into my arms after falling off his bike. The boy who believed I could heal any wound. But the shadow returned and he murmured, I love her, Mom. I can't abandon her. My chest burned as though pierced by a knife. It wasn't his love I fought against. It was the poison she distills beneath a guise of care. I don't ask you to abandon her, I said. I only ask you not to abandon yourself, and not to abandon me. He sighed, ran a hand over his face, stood, and said, I need to think. Then, he left, the door ajar, as if he lacked the courage to close it fully. I sat alone, listening to his steps fade down the hallway, and realized my son was torn. But every day of silence, every lie of hers, every humiliation brought me closer to victory. Sooner or later, truth is stronger than theate. Sometimes life shows us that not all battles must be fought alone. I realized that one afternoon when, leaving Mass, someone gently touched my arm. It was Paulo, a distant cousin of my son's, usually discreet, rarely drawn into family talk. That day his eyes carried a seriousness that caught my attention. Mrs. Helena, can I speak with you for a moment? He asked. We sat on a bench in the square in front of the church. He seemed hesitant, measuring his words, and finally confessed, I don't like what they're doing to you. I know many people are repeating stories, painting you as the villain, but I don't believe it. My heart leaped. And why don't you believe it? I asked, almost breathless. He took a deep breath. Because I've seen some things Clara did. How she manipulates conversations, how she twists facts. I've heard her speak poorly of you in front of acquaintances, insinuating you're selfish, unstable. My stomach turned, though it didn't surprise me. Paulo continued, At first I thought I was exaggerating, but the more I observe, the more I see she doesn't just want space. She wants to control everything, including your son. Tears pricked my eyes, but I held them back. Thank you for telling me, Paulo. I already suspected it, but hearing it from someone outside gives me strength. He nodded and added, Don't worry. Not everyone is blind. Some are starting to see the truth. And when the right time comes, you won't be alone. We walked back together and I felt a breath of hope cross my soul. For months I had carried the pain of being seen as the villain, humiliated and judged. But now I had an ally, someone who could testify when the masks fell. Deep down, I sensed her net was beginning to unravel. The web she wove so carefully had loose threads, and all it would take was pulling the right one to bring it crashing down. That night, lying in my bed, I felt something I hadn't in months. Hope. Paulo's words echoed inside me like a bomb. Not everyone believes her. Some are beginning to see the truth. It wasn't just comfort. It was ammunition. If there were attentive people eyes that could see past Clara's mask, then I wasn't as vulnerable as she wanted me to think. Right then I decided I would no longer leave it to chance. I would stitch my own fate. I would prepare, in silence, for her fall. I took the folder from its hiding place in the wardrobe, spread the documents across the table, and studied them like a war map. There was her past, debts, loans, contracts stained by irresponsibility. Proof that, before the right people, would dismantle the whole farce of the perfect wife. But I knew, waving papers wouldn't be enough. I needed the right moment, the right place, the right audience, because, like any play, a reveal only stings when it happens center stage. So I chose a three-front plan: keep my silence and serenity. The calmer I appeared, the more she would corrode herself trying to unbalance me, strengthen alliances. Paulo was only the beginning. I would find others willing to see beyond the facade, save the final blow. The proof would stay safe until the day everyone was gathered, a day she couldn't possibly escape. As I laid these plans, a different kind of strength filled my chest. It wasn't just survival, it was strategy. I was no longer the woman, slapped, humiliated, pushed aside. I was the woman waiting for the perfect moment to flip the story on its head. And with every provocation Clara set, every trap she laid for me, I had already decided I wouldn't answer with anger. I would answer with patience, because I would return her poison in the shape of truth. And when the truth was thrown down before them all, no scream, no tears, no lie would save her. The invitation landed in my hands like a poisoned arrow. A family dinner, organized by Clara, at an elegant restaurant in town. Everyone was summoned, aunts, cousins, close friends, the perfect occasion for her to shine, and to expose me. I held the envelope and felt the weight of the challenge. I knew it wasn't just a dinner. It was a stage. And she, a practiced actress, already had the script. I would be the villain, the bitter, the outdated. She, the perfect, generous wife, victim of my supposed cruelty. For a moment, I thought of declining. Then I smiled. Refusing would grant her victory in advance. I accepted, calmly, because every trap can become a stumble for the one who sets it. In the days before the dinner, I sensed Clara growing restless. She chatted with acquaintances, spreading insinuations and casting herself as a martyr. Poor me, I don't know what to do to win my mother-in-law's heart. And, at the same time, she let slip poisoned lines. Maybe she can't accept that her son's grown, that there's another woman at his side now. She was prepping the ground, seeding the expectation of a confrontation, so everyone would already lean her way when the show began. On the night, I dressed with simple elegance, a blue dress that set off my posture, hair neat, lipstick unwavering. I would not go as a victim, I would go as a warrior. As I arrived, I felt the eyes, some curious, others judgmental, and at the center of it all stood Clara, radiant, shepherding the guests like a soap opera hostess. When she saw me, she flung her arms wide and exclaimed, "How wonderful that you came, Mrs. Helena. I confess I thought you'd be too embarrassed to show up after so many disagreements." Tight laughter rippled through the tables. My heart burned, but my voice was calm. "Embarrassment, dear, belongs only to those who owe something." She blinked, surprised, and I caught the fury behind her frozen smile. In that instant, I knew the trap was set, but this time, I wouldn't be the prey. The restaurant glowed with tall candelabras, crystal flutes, fine plates chiming beneath the hush of careful conversation. It was the perfect backdrop for Clara to dazzle, and to cast me in shadow. She moved among the tables like a queen at her ball, handing out smiles, straightening my son's shoulders, displaying herself with every calculated gesture, and with every glance sent my way. I sensed it. They were all waiting for the show. They knew something would happen that night. After the starters, Clara raised her glass and called for attention. "I want to thank you for being here. Family is everything to me, and I hope we can always live in harmony." A dramatic pause. Her gaze found me, and the mask of sweetness barely hid the venom, including with my dear mother-in-law, who sometimes feels out of place amid so many changes. Smothered chuckles. My son stared down, embarrassed. I stayed firm and took a slow sip of wine. Clara continued, "But as a good wife, I only want everyone to live in peace, and for that, sometimes we have to give in. Isn't that right, Mrs. Helena?" Silence settled. All eyes fell on me. This was the planned moment. Either I backed down, confirming the rancorous image, or I exploded, giving her the perfect victim scene. I drew a breath, ready to respond, and then she made the mistake. Perhaps too confident, perhaps hungry to humiliate me once and for all. She let more slip than she should. Because really, what's the point of clinging to keys and papers if life is short? Better to pass things along while we can still watch others enjoy them. No. The words hung in the air. Keys, papers, pass along. Some guests exchanged confused looks. Her tone was no longer generosity. It was self-interest, and I realized she had shown, without meaning to, the edge of the veil hiding her true obsession. My heart quickened. I had to be careful. Not the moment to lay all my cards down, just to plant doubt. I raised my glass and smiled serenely. "That's true, Clara. Life is short. But some of us prefer to live it with dignity to the very end, instead of bargaining away what we earned with sweat." A murmur rippled along the table. She tried to laugh it off, but uncertainty flashed in her eyes. And in that instant, I felt the game tilt. The trap was still there, but the audience wasn't applauding blindly anymore. Clara had always been skilled at theater. She knew how to pitch her voice, her smiles, her tears. But that night, for the first time, I saw the mask slip. After my calm toast, an awkward hush washed over the room. Some guests looked away, others whispered. No applause, no laughter, only doubt, and she felt it. She felt the audience wasn't fully in her hands anymore. That's when she made her biggest mistake. Instead of backing off, she pressed on. Well now, she said with a forced laugh that rang a bit too sharp, I only meant that sometimes certain people cling so tightly to material things that they forget what matters most, family. Isn't that right, mother-in-law? My son tried to intervene. Clara, please. She ignored him, eyes locked on mine. I keep thinking, what's the sense of a lady already of advanced age, holding an apartment like it's buried treasure? Wouldn't it be lovelier to see that space serve new generations? Instead of being kept under lock and key like a vault, the murmurs swelled. This wasn't love, not unity. It was greed, laid bare. My heart flared, but I kept my composure. Clara, I answered softly, without raising my voice, what is lovely to some is shameful to others. Some take pride in what they earned through sweat. Others only know how to take pride in what they wrench from someone else. The room went still. My son looked up, surprised by my steadiness, and, for the first time, I saw color rise to Clara's face. She forced a chuckle and tried to change the subject, but the wound was open. The looks were no longer approving. They were doubtful, some even reproachful. She had shown too much, and I knew, once someone loses control, the fall becomes inevitable. By the end of the evening, the dinner no longer had the luster Clara had dreamed of. She still tried to smile, but each gesture was strained, every word threaded with the tension hanging in the air. And my son was different. I saw the embarrassment in his eyes, the shame he tried to hide. He didn't raise his voice, didn't defend me in public, not yet, but I felt something in him give way. Outside the restaurant, while everyone traded quick goodbyes, he lingered a few steps behind. He gripped my arm discreetly and whispered, Mom, I don't know what to say. I looked at him with tenderness, even as my heart lay in pieces. You don't have to say anything, my son, just see. He looked away, as if he couldn't bear to face his own doubt, but I saw it. There were cracks in his gaze. His blind trust in Clara was no longer so solid. In the days that followed, I sensed the change in small things. His cold calls grew a little longer. He started asking about my health, my day, even if briefly. And one afternoon he showed up alone, without Clara. He brought a grocery bag and said, I thought you might need help with a few things. Not much, but something. A spark. A sign that there was still room for me. And for the truth inside him. Clara noticed too. And when she did, the war only intensified. Because a woman who feels control slipping doesn't retreat. She attacks with more ferocity. I knew her next move wouldn't be just a jab. It would be a direct strike, desperate enough to turn everyone against me. This time, I was ready. This time, I had my weapons. When Clara realized fissures were opening in my son's heart, panic set in. I saw it in her eyes. The serene actress was gone. Fear was gnawing at her mask, so she decided to attack head-on. I received an invitation to afternoon tea at her house. It came in both their names, but I knew whose idea it was. Something in me said it wasn't a family get-together. It was a trap. Even so, I accepted. Sometimes you have to step onto enemy ground to show you're not afraid of the war. I arrived with a box of homemade biscuits, simple, made with care. The living room was full. Aunts, cousins, close neighbors, all women I knew, the very mouths that had carried whispers that wounded me so many times. Clara greeted me with that counterfeit enthusiasm. So glad you came, mother-in-law. We were all looking forward to having you. Eyes turned toward me, heavy with expectation. She had staged the scene, I could tell. After a few minutes of small talk, Clara stood and, with the air of someone confiding something painful, spoke loudly enough for all to hear. I worry about Mrs. Helena's health. Sometimes I think she's been forgetful, a little confused. I'm afraid something could happen and she'd end up locked in at home with no one to help. A murmur rolled through the room. Some women nodded, others raised their brows. Clear as day. She wanted to paint me as fragile, vulnerable, unfit. My heart pounded, but I stayed composed. I smiled and answered, Clara, I appreciate your concern, but I can assure you, my memory is steady, my mind clear, and my keys well kept. The last line landed like thunder. The whispers stopped. A few women giggled. Others bit their lips to keep straight faces. Clara tried to recover. faking a laugh. Don't misunderstand me, mother-in-law. I only care about your well-being. Sometimes we have to admit when we can't carry everything alone. I met her gaze and, still serenely replied, admitting our weaknesses is a virtue, but mistaking strength for weakness is an error. And that one, I don't make. Silence fell, heavy. She had tried to expose me as unbalanced, but in the end, she was the one who walked away weakened. Because in that room, in those curious eyes, there wasn't just complicity with her story anymore. There was doubt. And doubt is the beginning of the end for every lie. The week after the tea, my son showed up at my apartment. This time, he was alone. His eyes held exhaustion, but also something different. A flicker of doubt, as if he carried questions he'd never dared to ask. We sat in the living room. I poured him coffee, and after a few minutes of silence he said, "Mom, I need to understand what happened at that tea." My heart sped up. He knew. Someone had told him. I stayed calm. "Ask your wife. She organized it." He ran a hand through his hair. "Nervous. She said she was only worried about you, that you've been forgetful, that you might be putting yourself at risk." I gave a bitter smile. So she left out the part where she exposed me in front of all the women in the family. She didn't mention that she used concern as a mask to call me weak. His silence was answer enough. He knew something was wrong. "Mom, why can't you two get along?" he asked, almost pleading. I met his eyes, steady. "Because I don't bargain with my dignity, my son, and because your wife doesn't know how to love without owning. She doesn't just want you. She wants everything that comes with you, including what isn't hers." He drew a deep breath, clearly shaken. I don't know what to think anymore. I love her, but sometimes I feel she pushes things too far." I moved closer and took his hands. "My son, I don't want you to stop loving her. I only want you to see the truth. Love is not a prison. Love is not blackmail. Love is not ambition." He lowered his head, as if fighting his own thoughts, and for the first time, he didn't rush to defend her. He didn't accuse me, didn't scold me, didn't repeat her scripted lines. He left in silence, but in his eyes there was something new, the seed of doubt sprouting, and I knew that once doubt is born, no lie can bloom forever. It didn't take long for Clara to appear at my door. This time, no invitations, no audience, no disguises. She knocked hard, walked in without waiting, and sat at my kitchen table as if she owned the place. "We need to talk, Mrs. Helena," she said, crossing her legs and fixing me with an icy smile. My heart sped, but my face stayed composed. "Go on." She took a breath like someone starting a rehearsed speech. "I know we have our differences, but deep down, I want the same thing you do. What's best for my husband, your son." I smiled, bitterly. I already knew where this was going. "And for that," she continued, "we need to live in peace. No fights, no conflicts, none of this tension that's wearing everyone down. You want that, don't you?" "Of course, I want peace," I said. "But real peace, not an imposed silence." She leaned in, eyes shining with ambition. "Then why make it hard? If you handed over the apartment, or at least put it in his name, everything would change. I could finally relax, trust you. We could live in harmony, without suspicion." My stomach turned. There it was. No mask, no half words. The real goal, laid bare. "What are you proposing, Clara? That I buy peace in my own family with the keys to my home?" She didn't back off. "It's not buying. It's security. For all of us. Think about it. What's the point of clinging to something you'll have to leave behind sooner or later?" Her audacity made me shiver, but I didn't show it. I drew a slow breath and smiled. Cold. "Clara, peace bought with blackmail never lasts. And if you think you'll bend me with that sort of offer, then you still don't know me." The triumphant gleam in her eyes went out. She tried to laugh it off, but the strain gave away her frustration. She stood, smoothed her dress, and before leaving tossed one last line, "You're choosing the hard way." I closed the door and rested my forehead against the wood. Yes, it would be hard, but it was the only dignified way. And now more than ever I was sure, the war had reached its final phase. After Clara's visit, there were no doubts left. The war was no longer hidden in gestures or insinuations. She had shown her face without shame. A woman who saw in my apartment not just a roof, but the solution to all her financial ghosts. I shut the door and went to the bedroom. I opened the wardrobe and pulled out the folder hidden beneath my winter clothes. I spread the documents on the bed. Loan contracts, proof of debts, papers signed by Clara's own mother. Each sheet was a weapon. Together, they were an arsenal capable of shattering her mask of perfection. For weeks I had guarded them like a dangerous secret. Now I understood. The waiting was over. It was time to prepare the stage, but I knew papers alone wouldn't do it. The reveal had to happen before the right audience, at the right moment. Only then would it have the force to topple the facade Clara had labored to build. So I decided, the next family gathering would be the setting. Everyone together, everyone attentive, everyone ready to judge. That's where I would expose the truth. That's where I would show who the woman who slapped me on her own wedding day really was. But I also knew a misstep could turn them all against me. I needed caution, allies, witnesses, to confirm what I held in my hands. I thought of Paulo, the distant cousin who already saw past her mask. He could be a supporting voice, a pair of eyes to validate my words. Perhaps others, too, who had begun to suspect. I sat on the edge of the bed and breathed deeply. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with expectation, with strength, with certainty, because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't just reacting to her traps. I was setting my own, and when the curtain rose, there would be no going back. Truth would strike like lightning across that theater of lies, and in front of everyone, she would feel the sting of reality's slap. Aunt Lurdy's house buzzed with voices, forced laughter, and the clink of glasses. It was another of those family get-togethers that, months before, would have filled me with pain and shame. But that night I didn't arrive as a victim. I arrived as a warrior. And tucked inside my leather bag was the folder that would change everything. I walked in with steady steps, greeting everyone with a calm smile. I saw curious looks, heard muffled whispers. Expectation hung in the air. They were used to it. Whenever Clara and I shared the same room, sparks flew, and deep down they craved the spectacle. Clara, as always, stood at the center. Elegant dress, flawless makeup, voice pitched to command the conversation. When she saw me, she forced a sweet smile. "So glad you came, mother-in-law. We were all just saying how renewed you look." Polite chuckles fluttered around. I simply nodded, keeping my composure. Dinner unfolded under a nearly palpable tension. Clara seized every chance to slip in venom. I admire people who, even older, try to keep it together, even when their mind doesn't help much. It's lovely to see someone cling so tightly to an apartment. Me, I think home is where the heart is, not what's on the deed. Laughter was nervous, glances evasive. I didn't react. I smiled, chewed slowly, sipped my wine, because I knew her moment was approaching. And it wouldn't be me who raised my voice. It would be the truth, finally speaking for me. Beside me, I noticed Paulo watching in silence. When our eyes met, he gave me the slightest nod. Confirmation I wasn't alone. While Clara laughed loudly, holding court, I ran a hand over the bag on my lap. Inside, the proof that would bring her castle of illusions down. The clock seemed to beat each second like a war drum. I could feel it. The hour was near. Dinner was nearly over when Clara decided to play her last card. She lifted her wineglass and, like the seasoned actress she was, asked for quiet with a theatrical gesture. All eyes went to her. "I want to thank you all for being here. Family is our greatest treasure," she said, pausing as if for applause. "Which is why we need to think about the future, about the next generations, about the legacy we leave behind." Her gaze slid to me, sharp as a blade. "And it isn't fair that some people cling so tightly to material goods that they end up blocking the growth of those who come after." A murmur passed around the table. It was too clear. She wasn't talking about family. She was talking about my apartment. Those words rang through the room like a veiled accusation. My son dropped his eyes, visibly uncomfortable. Some guests traded looks, others shook their heads. Clara, however, smiled, triumphant. She was sure she held the audience in her hands. She didn't notice the taut line already fraying above her. I stood, calmly. Silence fell at once. I held my glass and said, "You're right, Clara. Legacy matters most. But it isn't made only of walls or papers. It's made of choices. And choices always leave marks, some of dignity, others of shame." Eyes turned to me. Clara tried to laugh, but the sound trembled. "What do you mean by that?" I stepped to the table, set down my glass, and quietly opened my bag. My fingers found the folder hidden inside. My heart pounded like a drum. "I mean that sometimes what we bury in the past finds its way back. And when it does, it reveals who we really are. A heavy hush fell over the room. Clara blanched, her eyes locked on me, wide, like someone who senses the catastrophe. And I knew the moment had come. The folder in my hands seemed to carry not only papers, but years of silence, humiliation, and pain. I looked around, everyone watched, alert, as if they sensed something extraordinary was about to happen. Clara tried to cut in, her voice catching. "Mother-in-law, what are you doing?" I breathed deeply and opened the folder with calm. I spread the contracts, the receipts, the signatures across the table. Worn pages, but words that burned like fire. "I'm showing the truth. Clara, the one you hid so well from everyone. Here are the debts tied to the dangerous man you got involved with. Here's the loan taken out in your mother's name. Here's the proof that behind the smiles and the pose of a perfect wife, there's only greed and desperation." A buzz filled the room. Aunts leaned in to see the papers. Cousins whispered. Neighbors stared wide-eyed. Paulo stood firm at my side and spoke up. "I've seen Clara manipulate, twist, invent. This isn't the first time she's tried to destroy someone to get what she wants." My son shot to his feet. "Is this true?" he asked, voice shaking, eyes fixed on his wife. Clara stammered, tried to laugh, tried to deflect. "This is an attack, an invasion. Those papers don't prove anything." But her voice was weak, and the looks around her were doubtful now, not supportive. I lifted my head and, meeting my son's eyes, said, "I kept quiet when she called me bitter. I kept quiet when she spread that I was confused, unbalanced. I kept quiet even when she slapped me on your wedding day. But today, Clara, you don't get to hide. Your own story is screaming against you." The room sank into a perfect silence. My son had gone pale, his hands trembling. Clara looked around, desperate, an actress who's forgotten her lines mid-scene. And in that instant, I felt something inside me, not just victory, but release, because at last, the truth had been spoken, and it could not be erased. For a moment, the room stayed in absolute silence. The clatter of silverware had stopped, the conversations were gone, even breathing seemed held. Everyone stared at Clara, no longer as admirers, but as judges before the accused. My son was the first to break the silence. He rose slowly, hands shaking, eyes on the papers scattered across the table. "Is it true, Clara?" he asked, voice thick. She tried to smile, but it died before it formed. "Honey, I did those things in the past. It has nothing to do with now. I only wanted to protect you, protect us, protect," he cut in, voice rising, "by hiding debts, by manipulating, by using my mother as a scapegoat." Clara reached for his arm, but he pulled back. "You lied to me, Clara. All these months you made me believe my mother was the problem, that she was hard, selfish, but you were the one lying." A murmur rolled through the room. Aunts shook their heads in reproach. Cousins whispered, indignant. Even the most indifferent looked at her with disdain. The image of the perfect wife was collapsing in front of everyone. Then, Aunt Lourdes, usually so measured, spoke up. "I suspected it. I always found her obsession with Helena's keys strange. Now it all makes sense." Others agreed, and the room filled with voices. Clara tried to defend herself, but each word only dug the hole deeper. "You don't understand. I needed security. I just wanted stability, but it was too late." The looks were no longer understanding. They were condemning. My son turned to me, eyes wet. "Mom, forgive me. I was blind. I let her turn me against you. I should have trusted you from the start." I gripped his hands, and at last tears ran down my face. "My son, I fought my whole life for you. I never needed your apologies, only your truth. And now, finally, it's here, behind us." Clara sobbed alone, surrounded by icy stares, and in that moment I realized her fall had begun. Not because I shoved her down, but because the truth pushed her into the abyss she'd dug herself. After that night, nothing was the same. Clara's castle of illusions collapsed in front of everyone, and the walls of silence that had imprisoned me for months crumbled with it. She tried to resist, to glue the shards of her broken mask back together, but there was no audience left willing to applaud. The aunts who once swooned over her smiles now avoided her. The cousins who parroted her stories now whispered about her falseness, and my son was no longer her blind ally. In the days that followed, he came to me often, heavy with guilt, full of apologies. I listened. I held him. But I reminded him, "My son, true love isn't measured by apologies. It's measured by the courage to learn from our mistakes and not repeat them. He cried in my arms like the boy he once was, and in that moment I realized our bond, though wounded, had never broken. Her manipulation only covered it for a time. As for Clara, she drifted away. Some said she lived reclusive, others that she still hunted for new targets for her ambitions. It mattered little to me. Her defeat didn't lie in what she lost, but in what she revealed, the emptiness inside her. And me. I moved on. I kept tending my apartment, the flowers on the balcony, my nighttime embroidery. But it wasn't just a home anymore. It was a symbol, an invisible trophy of my fight. Proof that when dignity is defended, it becomes a fortress. Sometimes, passing through the kitchen, I look at the keys on the table. I touch them softly, remembering all I endured, the slap at the wedding, the quiet humiliations, the cruel whispers, the silent tears, and I smile, because in the end, it wasn't the keys that defined me. It was my strength in refusing to hand them over. I learned that justice is not revenge. Justice is the truth revealed at the right time, before the right people. And truth always wins. It can be muffled, delayed, mocked, but never defeated. Today, when I walk the neighborhood streets, I no longer feel judgmental eyes. I feel respect, not because I beat Clara, but because I didn't let her beat me. And if one day someone asks me what legacy is, I'll answer, legacy is leaving those we love with the certainty that dignity is non-negotiable. It's the one treasure that can never be taken. When night falls and the house grows quiet, I like to sit on the balcony and watch the distant city lights. The breeze slips through the curtains, carrying not just the scent of the flowers I planted, but the memory of everything I lived. I hold no grudge. Grudges imprison us. I keep memory, and memory, tempered by courage, turns into wisdom. The keys are still with me, firm on the same old key ring. I no longer see them as simple bits of metal. I see the story of a woman who faced loneliness, manipulation, and contempt, and stayed standing. Many say life is made of losses. I say it's made of choices. And my choice was not to give up my dignity, even when everyone seemed against me. Clara was only a storm, furious, loud, destructive. But like every storm, she passed, and after her came a clear sky, brighter, calmer, truer. My son still carries scars, but now he knows. A mother's love isn't measured in possessions, but in roots. And no matter how the winds tug, true roots always hold. If one day I go, and I know that day will come, it won't be the apartment I leave behind as an inheritance. It will be the memory that I fought to the end. The certainty that justice may take its time, but never fails. The strength that whispers without a sound. Dignity is not surrendered. And as long as there is even one woman who, like me, refuses to bow to injustice, I know my story won't be in vain. Because every key defended with courage is, at heart, the key to our own freedom. Did you enjoy this story? Then leave a like, share it with someone who will be moved, and subscribe to the channel.